Well, let's turn to the UK. The British Prime Minister will tonight attempt to call a general election, it seems, but in a sign of the extraordinary turmoil in Westminster, Labor MPs may well try to actually stop him. That's despite demanding an election for some time now. This follows Boris Johnson's first parliamentary loss as Prime Minister on the first, parliamentary vote under his leadership. He's trying to keep this no-deal Brexit on the table, but Parliament doesn't seem to like that idea. A motion has been passed, 328 votes to 301, that's allowing backbenchers essentially to take control of the Parliament anytime tomorrow. Prime Minister Johnson says he's not playing ball with that. Let's go to Professor Benjamin Laker from the Henley Business School in London, who joins me now. Thanks very much for your time. What is going to happen there over the course of the next 24 hours? Is it clear that Boris Johnson will be able to call an election?
Not as clear as he would like. And with 57 days to go, the Brexit civil war, as you've mentioned, has taken some unprecedented twists and turns last night in the House of Commons. So today, as you've mentioned, the Rebel Alliance, those are Boris Johnson's words, including 21 of his own party members, they have taken control of the order book, and they will today seek to bring a bill to legislate against leaving with a no deal. And of course, that is his negotiation strategy. And he has been quoted as saying, if you do this, you will take the legs of under our negotiation strategies. And of course, as you've mentioned, he wants to call a general election. But that's not as straightforward as he would like, because under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, he actually needs 2/3 of the MPs in favour. And as you've mentioned, despite for the last 2 years, Jeremy Corbyn and Labour seeking to have a general election, now is the time to do so. And they don't want to do so. And that is because they are not successful enough to believe that they will win. Now, the ace in the sleeve of Boris Johnson is that the bill today, it may pass the House of Commons, but he has a huge amounts of support in the House of Lords. And they have already sought to table over 90 amendments to the bill to effectively stop it. And that could be the way that Boris Johnson regains control of this situation and not necessarily require a general election.
So the bill that may pass, likely to pass the Commons, saying no to a no-deal Brexit, it could essentially just be stalled in the House of Lords. Is that the most likely scenario there? So that it wouldn't actually need to go to royal assent at all?
That's correct. That is the strategy of Boris Johnson and his advisor, Dominic Cummings. And you may recall they are still planning to prorogue Parliament. So a bill of this type, which would nearly often require weeks of discussion, it needs to be passed within 3 days or less. Now, it may pass the Commons very quickly because last night we saw the numbers were there, the 321. But the Lords are already saying that we need 90 amendments and each one of these will need to be discussed. So if the time runs out, then the bill dies and effectively it will never actually come into effect, and therefore Boris Johnson still has control.
And therefore an election would not be required? Can Boris Johnson proceed to a no-deal Brexit if it comes to that without an election?
He will certainly think that if there is no bill on the table and he does not have a 2/3 majority because Labour are blocking for an election, then one may not necessarily materialise. And that's why he's been very clever with his narrative. He is not simply saying that I want to call a general election. If you look, his narrative is, if this is what you want, then you are pushing us into a position where a no-deal Brexit and necessarily an election may have to happen as a matter of course. But he's very clever as to saying, I'm not necessarily going to call it. If you push us into a corner, that may happen as part of parliamentary process. So my view is there may not be an election. And that's because the House of Lords are going to come and save Boris Johnson.
If it does get to the point where he's pushed into that corner, as you say, when would an election most likely happen? Before or after that deadline of October 31 for the Brexit?
Those seeking to have the election will arguably it needs to happen before. But of course, this has been part of the Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson strategy. If we were to go to the polls, and that normally takes about 8 weeks, we don't have that much time. So there is a possibility that an election could be called. And if it's not done so within a quick amount of time, the UK could fall out of the EU by default, because at the moment, 31st of October is the date. So you might have a change of government during that time, and yet the first thing on the order book for the new government coming in the middle of November, say, could be to pick up where Boris Johnson has left off, but the UK essentially being outside of the EU.
Well, we will see. Professor Benjamin Laker, really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us there from London.